Hi everybody and welcome. We'll get started. We have 3 presentations for you today. We have a good turnout here from DART to 391. So attendance is ticked for everybody. To begin, I'd first like to greet you all and greet the space. So tēnā koutou katoa. Hello and greetings to all. I'd like to begin first with a mihi, which is an acknowledgement in my mother tongue, te reo Māori. So ngā mihi nui, me te araha nui ki a koe mō te mahi, ki PK Langshaw e te whānau Concordia. Kia ora koutou. So thank you to PK Langshaw and her team for the vision and the insight to bring together this really wonderful symposium, drawing together researchers from across different departments and faculty in Concordia to highlight and to bring to the forefront conversations around sustainability. This is really important work and it creates space for important dialogues, so kia ora. Secondly, to introduce and situate myself as a human being and as a researcher, ko Piki Whara te Moka, ko Otaku te Awa, ko Puki te Roto, no mo o Poko aho, te Waiponamu Aotearoa, ko Kaitahu te iwi, takutaha tai tō iwi, no Huatine, no Airangi, no Kotoirana aho, ko Miranda Smitherin, toku ingoa, no reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. So if you can't see the screen, I've just told you who I am by introducing the mountain that I belong to, which is Piki Whara, the body of water that I belong to, which is Otako, Puki te Roto, which is my lake, the outer Dunedin Harbour, and Te Waiponamu, the South Island of New Zealand where I come from. My tribes, which is Kaitahu, and my other tribes, which are Sweden, Ireland, and Scotland, also, and Miranda is my name. So in my talk today, we're going to think about what it means to collaborate with or make with environment. So I'm going to introduce to you a number of different projects, including my own, that involve deep and reciprocal collaboration with environments. So these projects span disciplines, domains, art and science, research and activism, and they range in outputs from design research, art, dance and performance, zines, film, to philosophical research creation. The subjects of these examples are likewise diverse. Beehives and cities, living and dying glaciers in New Zealand and Norway, Indigenous sites embodied by dancers, lichen grown on linen, yet they are all linked by an ethos of designing with rather than designing for. Then I'll introduce to you a very recent project which centralizes a specific approach to design, which is working with invasive plant species on the unceded territory of Decolonial, Montreal. So the first image shows, on the left, a still image from a digital artwork that I produced during a collaborative project called Indigenous Stamina. This brought together different Indigenous activists and dancers interacting with cultural narratives of place at Uluru in Australia and Lake Rotorua in New Zealand. So working with images extracted from the video work, I formed a sequence of textures, and a dancer from Atamira Dance Company was motion captured, and I replaced the textures onto the dancer's motion, resulting in this idea of a sort of shifting, liminal, but embodied landscape. So the work was first installed during a performance by Atamira, the dance company. Then it was commissioned into a digital artwork, a second iteration for the International Triennale of Media Art, which is touring now in Australia. The second project I wanted to introduce was the intelligent gorilla beehive. This is a project that started in 2016, and it's a collaboration with the non-human other. Honeybees and bacteria become interfaces to be informed about the health status of our environment. Bees and bacteria become living monitoring technology. So essentially the research program that the Beehive is based around surveys in a really artistic approach multiple fields of interaction between honeybees and the urban ecosystem. It's also really remarkable in this project to see how a bee population functions and evolves, very much in accordance to the human activities that we are developing around them, such as gardening and urban agriculture. The next two projects that I'm introducing are two multi-species video artworks from completely opposite hemispheres that address climate change and ice melting through presence and absence of the human. On the left, there's a video work which documents the glacial meltwater from Kai Roimata o Hinihuka-Tiri, the Franz Joseph Glacier in Tiohtiá, west coast of Aotearoa, New Zealand, as it flows into the Waiho River. In Te Reo Māori, waiho means to leave be or leave alone. In our kaitahu cosmology, the glacier is actually formed from the tears of the goddess Hinihuka-Tiri. So live sound recordings from the glacier and the Waiho River form the sound composition, and there are few living beings in this grey water, yet it is alive. The second work on the right, Waterflux Ice Gut, is a hydrochoreography, and it's an embodied response and a gesture to ice melting and connecting multi-species through blue ontologies. Performing with the Oslo Fjord's ice tides, human and non-human bodies entangle through corporeality, exploring interspecies vulnerability, precarity, and climate empathetic towards embodied solidarity. The work was filmed in the Oslo Fjord during the winter, and that you can see an image of the performer there dancing with the ice. In this piece, the ice actually choreographs the human body with its tides and currents, and while the human body navigates their ice membranes in flux, exchanging heat symbiotically. This next project, for those of you who are more visual communication orientated, is a really charming project I came across recently by an artist called Bradvic. I've put some of the little zines up the front here. He has a very specific point of view with developing zines that are around interspecies collaboration and interspecies interaction. So you can see meditation with insects, making art for fish, yielding to butterflies, and living with spiders. So in the font and the form and the shape and the structure of these stories, he brings us into considering the perspective of the other species that we live amongst and live with. Next, a project called Phenomenal Dress. These images are showing activations with sea salt, tides, spinifex, and lichen, all at Karikari Beach in Aotearoa, New Zealand. This was part of a Phenomenal Dress project that I worked on between 2017 and 19, and it was a active collaborative engagement with ecosystem of Karikari, which is a titanomagnetite iron sand beach located on the west coast of the North Island of New Zealand. So the collaboration was developed through a scaffolding of relational kinship assemblages made up of heterogeneous things in this environment and the liaisons and formations that grew from their interactions. Here the term thing refers to objects, phenomena, materialities, and physical bodies and the relations between those things with each other and with humans. So the frameworks that informed this research were in particular post-humanism and Indigenous Māori perspectives, and to this we brought distinctive framings and approaches to enable human environmental engagements through reciprocal processes of making with, rather than extractive processes of making from things in the ecosystem. So the knowledge and the insights were extended through sensing and responding to the vital materiality of the phenomena found on this beach. This was a tracing of kinship and whakapapa, which translates loosely as lineage or the geological descent of all things between human and non-human in ecosystems. And finally, I'm very excited to present to you today the Decolonizing Material Futures Cookbook. This is a bioplastics cookbook. It was a long-standing research project to design bio-composite materials in collaboration with invasive plant species in and around the unceded Indigenous territories of Guerrilla and Montreal. So the project centered really slow design processes and responded to these ideas of deep engagement, of attending to, of observing, of sensing, of noticing, of witnessing weeds and their relations and relationships. So through these actions of getting to know you, we consider the origin of these invasive plant species, the colonizing politics of their presence, their socio-cultural histories, their behaviours, their properties, their relatives, their friendships, and their entanglements. So this design research examines the kinship, essentially, of weeds and the potential for reframing historically problematic plants into future materials. This project was led by myself with research and design by Sita Singh, Juan Esteban Major Gomez, and Catherine Vian Betchand. I'll just take you through a couple of pages of the Cookbook. It's intended as an open source publication, so we will be launching it on Spectrum, the Concordia Library open source format very shortly. Whoops, back a page. So we looked at 4 major species that we identified, buckthorn, phragmites, plantain, and tansy. Each of these started with a process of observation, getting to know the plant and its material behaviours and interactions. So buckthorn on the left, we see it in its raw state. We learned some things about its rhizomic structure, about how it propagates, and then unfolded the research creation through developing recipes, looking at different levels of materiality, opacity, strength, and tenacity developed in the different species. The next one we looked at was Fragments Astralis, another very rhizomic orientated a fast-growing weed, which you probably see along roadsides if you're driving out of Montreal. It really likes the salt and tends to attract itself to those spaces. It's highly competitive with other plant species, and it grows extremely fast. So in doing so, it generally drowns out through blocking light smaller native plant species. So looking at observations of phragmites and developing some speculative bio-composite materials, working with that, that ended up having a very strong and sort of robust shape and form. Plantain, which is a very interesting one. Plantain, even if you don't know the word, I'm sure you're all most familiar with. It's very pervasive. Its other name it's known as is white man's footprint, and it literally follows the steps of colonization across multiple continents. It's a really interesting plant. It has a lot of really good medicinal properties as well. You can eat it. It's quite like spinach, quite high in vitamin C. It's very tenacious. As I mentioned, it grows in cracks in concrete. It grows in hard-packed ground. So plantain, we had a look at that. Sita did some wonderful observations of finding it in its first environment, encountering it, and making some observations about its behavior. And then looking at developing a series of recipes that explore those behaviors through different strategies. Lastly, we looked at tansy, who does not much like shadow, and it prefers full sun. We did observations of tansy and looked at its characteristics and behaviors, and developed some very opaque and delicate surfaces from the tansy. So as I mentioned, that publication will be open source and available through Spectrum, the Concordia depository. Just to end on collaboration with environments, thinking through how we make with, how we design with, how we become with. This image always really strikes me. It was taken in 1975 at Morro Rock in California. It's two brothers, Sean and Michael McQuillan, and they're on a hiking trip with their sister and another brother and some friends. And then nearby visitors noticed that their hair was literally standing on end. So their sister took a photograph of the laughing boys, and then a few minutes later they were struck by lightning. The boys survived, but the younger child had third-degree burns. I first came across this photograph in an environmental humanities article, and it really struck me for so many reasons. There's a real inherent madness in the image. The hair seems bewitched, and in the heedless laughter of the boys, exposed to radical atmospheric intensities. This image and its story seem to speak to becoming with in our darker and unpredictable ecological moment. So these concepts of making with, designing with, and becoming with invite us to consider ourselves in collaboration with the world around us, not as humans separate from the ecosystem. In doing so, we start to address the systemic pathology of a species disconnected from the conditions of its living world. Becoming with offers a metaphysics grounded in connection, challenging delusions of separation, the erroneous belief that somehow it's possible to exempt ourselves away from the Earth's ecology. Donna Haraway tells us that if we appreciate the foolishness of human exceptionalism, then we know that becoming is always becoming with, in a contact zone where the outcome, where who is in the world is at stake. So to me, this image speaks directly to the life and death stakes of failing to recognize connectivity, reciprocity, feedback loops, interdependence, and vulnerability. So just in concluding that conversation, sustainability is a multi-species affair. If we have any dreams of handing a livable world to our descendants, we need to fight for the possibilities of resurgence. The biggest threat to resurgence is the simplification of the living world as a set of assets and commodities for future investment. To appreciate truly and deeply anthropocentric challenges, we need to pay more attention to the cross-species socialities on which we all depend. We can never disconnect from Earth's ecological community because we are always ultimately becoming with in a living multi-species world composed of phenomena, transitions, and interactions. Thank you.
Hi, Miranda.
Hello.
I was wondering, as you were doing your discourse, which was amazing, so thank you, what is the qualification of an invasive species? What makes it? What are the aspects that qualify it? And as a second part question, what stance do we take when we decide to intervene in these immeasurably complex system in which maybe an intervention could cause other repercussions?
No, that's a really good question, and a very big question, so I'll tackle part of that. Invasive plant species are plants that originate from elsewhere, either deliberately or coincidentally disseminated and populated somewhere else. The main problem with invasive plant species that we identify is generally their tenacity, which is very interesting because the key quality I see in that is resilience. So I see that as an opportunity, as something we can look at and work with as a collaborative plant species to really identify how are they so resilient. In Indigenous communities, there is actually quite a lot of research going into looking at invasive plant species and looking at potential for different localized material solutions developed from those plant species. What was the second part of the question?
What stance do we take when we decide to intervene in this very complex array of repercussions that might, let's say an example would be the prickly pear that was taken from Mexico to Australia and then became, let's say, invasive, and then they brought in insects to try and tackle that, but that created its own.
No, you've raised something really perfect, actually, is that doubling up of that's happened time and time again, of a problem being addressed by another problem, and the perpetuation and the doubling and the folding back in of those things. So I guess my approach at this point is really thinking about how we can frame those things differently, rather than approaching design itself as a problem to solve, to be actually approaching it from a different perspective, which is getting to know something, the matter that you're engaging with, really looking at its interactions, its material properties, its relationships, and its potentials, right? So eradication is one thing, but as we've learned in history, eradication usually involves using something either toxic or something else invasive to deal with the first one. Yeah. Thank you. Any other questions? No? Cool. Thank you.